On today's World Insight with Tian Wei. A decade to the day since the awe-inspiring opening of the 2008 Beijing Olympics, we'll talk about the legacy of China's Olympic debut. And the trade war between China and the US spills into the auto industry. How are car companies coping?
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you live from Beijing on CGTN. Exactly a decade ago, Beijing hosted the 2008 Olympic Games. The grand event dazzled the world and the people here in China. China topped the medal table also for the very first time ever. Since then, there has been a huge growth in the number of people in China getting involved in sporting activities as the legacy of the Beijing Summer Olympic Games lives on. Before we get down to the discussion about what happened then and what's the legacy of the Beijing Olympic Games, take a look at this first.
Exhibitions, light shows, and various activities in remembrance of the day 10 years ago. On August 8, 2008, a row of 29 fireworks, which represented the 29th edition of the modern Olympics, were set off to mark the start of the Beijing Games. The spectacle-filled opening ceremony was regarded as one of the most beautiful in the event's history, as it celebrated 5,000 years of traditional Chinese culture. Spectators and the international media touted the ceremony as spectacular and spellbinding, and by many accounts, the greatest ever in the history of the Olympics. Today, the night that launched 1,000 games is a fond memory for Chinese citizens and international Olympic enthusiasts the world over.
We will always remember the fantastic opening ceremony which amazed the world with the rich and profound culture of China.
The Olympic spirit has had impacts on our attitudes towards life, and the facilities built for the 2008 Games also laid the foundation for national fitness programs.
China won its first gold medal at the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. In 2001, Beijing won the Olympic bid for the first time in history. And in 2008, the Chinese team went away with 51 golds, becoming the first Asian country to finish at the top of the medal table. 204 countries and regions took part in the Beijing Olympics, while 43 new world and 132 new Olympic records were set. It's not just all about the games. The idea of keeping fit has taken root among Chinese citizens, making it one of the Olympic legacies. In remembrance of China's Olympic debut, the Chinese National Fitness Day began on August 8 in 2009. The 2008 Games also left a massive legacy for the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. They are set to use 11 venues and stadiums, which were used 10 years ago. The Chinese capital also becomes the first city to host both the Summer and Winter Olympics, another one for the books.
For more discussion on the 10th anniversary of the Beijing Summer Olympic Games, in our Beijing studio, we have Paul Dong, who's a cultural communicator, who's also the CEO of iChina Limited, but certainly one who volunteered for the Beijing Olympic Games 10 years ago.
One who used to work with you, almost every evening.
Yes, exactly. And also sitting here in our Beijing studio, an economist coming from China, Liu Baocheng, Professor Liu Baocheng, welcome as well. Also joining us in London, in the UK, Simon Pusey, a sports commentator and also broadcaster. Certainly, we work together, shoulder by shoulder, for the Beijing Olympic Games as well, Simon. Good to see you, all of you. 10 years on. I remember, gentlemen, I'm sure you did too, the vivid pictures of Michael Phelps, 8 golds, Beijing Summer Olympic Games. Usain Bolt making his first try internationally on the Olympic stage. Those memorable moments. Where were you? Where were you?
But can we, very honestly, I only remember those numbers. I don't have vivid memory of your pictures because I had to work concentrate on beach volleyball
Yes, that's
at
where you
our
are.
broadcast
That's where you
in
were.
the studio, and so I only caught the news from hearing from other people.
So how about that, working on the beach volleyball? Did you enjoy it, every minute of it?
Well, it was very exhaustive and also exciting, and because beach volleyball, based on the rule, cannot stop whatever the weather condition was, and so
a lot of
Beijing
rain
had
that day.
torrential rains during those days, and so we had to dig the tunnel and to let the water out of the beach so that the game will continue, and also during the intervals, we jumped into the center of the beach court, trying to arouse the excitement of the relatively quiet Chinese audience.
At that time, you worked for Beijing's Olympic
I was on
Games,
BOCA, the Olympic organizing committee.
Yes, exactly. Those are memorable moments. Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah,
unforgettable throughout, exactly, for a lifetime. What about for you, Professor Liu? I'm sure you were not just calmly as an economist watching the TV and the opening ceremony.
Oh, yes. Actually, I lived very close to the stadium, so I could really
bird's
stand.
nest.
Yeah, to the bird's nest. I could really stand on the roof of the building to watch the whole thing without buying the tickets, though. So, and also I was supporting a number of volunteers, from middle school to universities.
Yes.
And that was really exciting moment. But it's not only the event per se, but the whole atmosphere and the event that drives the infrastructure construction and the spirit of voluntarity. So that is something more exciting.
Simon, I have to call on your name now. I mean, where were you during the Beijing Olympic Games? I know you were working, but tell me exactly what happened around you during those days. Unforgettable 3 weeks.
Yeah, I was working for a channel in the UK, and your last speaker's so right. Just the whole atmosphere changes, doesn't it, when there's an Olympics on, especially if it's in the host city where you are. So the moments I remember was obviously the Bird's Nest Stadium, the opening ceremony, $100 million supposedly spent on that, and those incredible fireworks. And then also Usain Bolt, many people hadn't heard of him before, and then he bursts onto the scene and he breaks the world record. So incredible memories from Beijing. And you said Phelps as well. There's so many different stories and people, and it is just such an enjoyable time, and I think Beijing did such a good job during it.
Exceptional. That's the word being used, isn't it? I remember so clearly coming from the president of the Olympic Committee. Exactly. But, things have changed. But when you look at what happened before the Beijing Olympic Games, there were a lot of things going on. Doubts about China, its capabilities, its potential, and the ego behind why China wants to host this Beijing Olympic Games.
Air quality also.
Controversies, right? When the torch was being spread around the world, obviously China wanted to have quite a blast when the torch relay ceremony is going on around the world. Remember those days?
Yeah, I remember that by reading in the news that a Singaporean leader warned the West that it will cause divide among for many generations. That they said the young people in China would never forgive those people who intervened, try to interrupt the torch relay. But actually, the Chinese people are forgetting about this very fast. Yes. But back then, during those moments, it was very, very difficult for us to accept.
Simon, it was a time when China absolutely in an urgency of world recognition in a way. And also it is a time China came out, some say even that year, 2008, becomes the year zero for China in a way, which is the beginning of something much more than what China used to be. I'm sure, Simon, you remember those debates going on in the UK. The torch relay in the UK was quite an event. What about that then, now when you reflect back?
Yeah, I think there's always, when there's a new host city, there's always going to be debates and is it ready? China had won lots of medals before, but it wasn't really seen as a sporting powerhouse and a place where the Olympics had been before. So I think there's always going to be a few fears and worries. But coming top of the medal table for the first time ever, how you proved that wrong. I think the regeneration of certain areas and wood buildings be ready on time and things like that. I think it was quite up to the wire in terms of when things were ready in the end. But yeah, what a spectacle it was. So you know, I think you certainly proved those doubters wrong.
Of course, we remember very well at the closing ceremony of Beijing Summer Olympic Games, the UK also did a great job in giving a preview about the next Summer Olympic Games, of course. But Professor Liu here, you know, what about those doubts? But what about those confirmations eventually when the opening ceremony happened? It's just a magical moment that everybody knows this is it.
That's right.
And it is it.
Yeah. Actually, for the next entire 2 years, my gift to all my foreign friends was really the CD for the Olympic event, opening ceremony, and together with those beautiful elite performance. So athlete performance, that's something very exciting. That's really proud for China, and this is also a weakening process, or even the epoch-making moment for China, because you know China was there to have the big dream to earn the recognition from the world, not only in economic terms, but also in the sports, in its art, and also in the management skills. This is a big event that requires very stringent organizational skills.
Yes, you use the word pride, but I guess it's only part of the story. The reason why China eventually was very proud, so is the rest of the world about China as well at the end of the Olympic Games, is that China finally become a part of the world. Just like that, an equal partner.
Exactly.
Not being someone that is different.
Is a second-class
not being
country.
So-called a second class. Not being asking others for so-called exception, but China become part of it, and the rest of the world applauded that. That is the moment that everybody is proud of, not just the pride of nations, but rather something of a bigger something than the nation.
Yeah, just as you quoted the speech Rex Rogue made at the closing ceremony, and before he used the word exceptional, he also mentioned that those 16 glorious days that we will cherish forever, quote unquote, made China learn about the world better, and the world learn about China better. And it was actually true. I think Tian Wei, to me, I think it's for CGTN, it's something also we learned that by bidding and hosting such a grand event, international event, even those controversies and suspicions ahead of it actually attracted more attention, unprecedented attention on just a few hours being performed inside the bird's nest, that you will pay billions of dollars in your other road shows that would not equal that effect.
So you're saying when the spotlight is on you, do it.
Absolutely. I had a conversation with ABC from Australia, the anchor, right after that.
Of course, there are a lot of people coming into China. This is the moment. But having said that, though, Simon, is China still as what it is, or rather what it was 10 years ago, be able to have like this sponge in a way, to be able to absorb as much as possible, as wonderful as possible, the things from around the world and make sure it is going to be part of China? Simon?
Yeah, well, I think 4 billion people watched the opening ceremony. It's about 2/3 of the world's population. So when you talk about eyes being on your country, they certainly were. I'd say the thing that people need to look at now really is the legacy and the impact, as well as remembering those incredible moments, but also what is the infrastructure being used for now, and also where is the sports now in terms of, China was top in the medal tables then. Will it be able to go better in the future in the next few Olympic Games? But yeah, certainly watching it, it's certainly put lots of Chinese athletes and sports on the map. People who, Sun Yang, you'd never heard of before, you're suddenly watching on TV winning all these medals. So a really great moment for China.
It is a great moment. It's also, I hope, a great moment for the world, because it's supposed to be an occasion that everybody celebrates. It's not just China's moment, but everybody's moment. Having said that, though, what about the reality check? Professor Liu, infrastructure, how well is being used? Meanwhile, after the Beijing Olympic Games, has the economy picked up? Has job opportunities increased? Has equality become a bigger word in the everyday policy making? Is sport becoming a pillar of the economy and also a pillar of people's everyday life? There are a lot of questions out there, Professor.
Well, as a matter of fact, before the Olympic, I visited a number of stadiums. Actually, they were selling furniture, selling garments in order to make some income, right? So, but after the Olympic, we see that more and more people are there to play badminton, to do the gym, and to do the running, etc. So we are really bringing back the ethos of sports and Olympic. And that's something very important to this nation's spirit. And the other is that the infrastructure is really changing a whole great deal, you know, from on a micro side, from all the street cleaning to the skyline.
That's right.
So that's something.
And some of the iconic buildings as well.
Exactly. And also economically, you know, the structure is set up there to with the more efficient management skills, so economy has really moved up quite a deal, and particularly this is Olympic. After all, it's not only sports but also events that
it's
involve
supposed to be
economics.
about more than just the sports. But Paul, has China realized its dream as won a bid for the Olympic Games?
Well, it was. I had to admit that it was a second bid from Beijing. Beijing narrowly lost to Sydney.
Yes.
And yeah, finally, I think China realized this dream and motivated the entire nation to pay attention, embrace this not indigenous Chinese culture is created. Most of the sports were created in the West.
Yeah.
But China was opening up, and people are more modern to embrace something Western, and they practice starting from the moment they hosted the Olympic Games, and now 10 years has passed, and more Chinese are practicing the Olympic sports in their real life instead of watching them only.
They do, and it has a lot to do with how the economy, how the society is changing. Of course, a lot of other questions that still need to be answered, as we mentioned earlier. Having said that, the Winter Olympic Games, China has been bidding, and now China is going to be the host, 2022. This time, though, the way people think is very different, I guess.
Absolutely.
Paul, how is it different, and what does it mean for China's preparation of this Winter Olympic Games? I mean, we have been there, done that, seen it, demonstrated it. So now, this time, it's going to be a different way of looking at Olympic Games.
Because China is already different from 10 years ago, and the Olympic movement has changed over the last 10 years. It's addressing the importance of sustainability instead of just grand scale extravaganza. So China is also learning from this, and China is digesting this spirit by itself, because China is also progressing from a fast expanding to more sustainable development model. And also, by hosting the Winter Olympics, China also set a target for you know, millions, if not hundreds of millions of Chinese to practice some sort of skiing or skating.
Wow, there's a goal there, but
that's
quite a challenging goal.
Yeah, that's a big challenge. But you know, how to host the Winter Games will demand much more you know, economic prowess to put it together.
Well, it's not just the money, I guess. There's a lot of more things. There are a lot of more things than just the money. Technology also. There are a lot of more than just technology and money, because technology and money wouldn't solve everything, right? Simon, what do you make of that? I mean, 10 years on, China 2022, it's a very different China. It's a very different Olympic movement.
Yeah, and it's a very different Olympic Games. Obviously, the Winter Olympics is sort of less well known than the Summer Olympics, and slightly less high profile. I don't think China will spend the 40 billion pounds it did on the previous Olympics, but still, it's a massive opportunity for China to show off what it can do. The last few Winter Olympics haven't been that great for China. I think 9 medals, 1 gold in the last one, but you've still got you know, hockey could make a big appearance. You've qualified for hockey because you're the host nation, and and you know, that could be massive because the NHL, obviously, a lot of Chinese fans in Canada watch that. So I think there's huge potential to open up all these new sports to people in China. So how many Chinese people have seen bobsleigh and, you know, things like this, the luge, and so I think, you know, there are certainly some sports that China's very good at, the speed skating, obviously. So there'll be some really exciting moments, but yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how China does.
It's going to be a very different China once again when 2022 is coming. Going to be very different from 2018, which is where we are now, right now. If you look at how the world is changing and how China is being debated by the rest of the world. Will that moment happen when the opening ceremony begins and then everything comes to a very exciting U-turn? Mr. Professor Liu.
I do not think it's going to be as exciting as what happened 10 years ago, but that means Chinese people are getting more matured. We are shifting more from, you know, emotional aspect, not to more rational aspect. And that means that, you know, Chinese people have further opened their eyes, and also China has successfully, after Olympic, you know, hosted so many global events. And, you know, people are having more confidence in that regard. And I assume that, you know, this really is going to be made more cost-effective from economic perspective. And also there will be equally more volunteers to participate.
Yeah, but at the end of the day, it's also about how sports are doing in China. Not just common people practicing sports, but rather how some of the top sportsmen and women in China are performing on the international stage. We debate about the sports system a lot over the past 10 years. Is it going to happen?
Yeah, and also sports will be a very strong, very important element in the overall greater cultural industry that China is very aggressively promoting in its economic transformation, because it would attract and create more jobs and attract more demographic attention and also participation. I think in just a few years, the difference that we will see in the Winter Olympics will be more and more young Chinese would feel so familiar with the sports, the winter sports, that many of them have already tried on the slope, and they know how it feels to skate and ski. Very different from what the audience were watching archery, shooting, you know, many of the summer games.
It was only as spectators, but this time as participants.
Absolutely.
It's going to be a great change, we hope. Best wishes for China and the rest of the world, the sports Olympic Games. But for now, I want to thank the three of you for being with us over the past 10 years. Thank you so much. Paul Dong, Liu Baocheng, Simon Pusey. What a pleasure, gentlemen, for being with you. 10 years on since Beijing Olympic Games.
How about working together in 2022?
Well, I'm sure we've got a lot of work to do. There we go. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Still to come on our program. The auto industry bears the brunt of the trade war between China and the U.S. We will talk about how car companies are faring right after this break. You're watching World Insight with me, Tian Wei. With the escalation of the U.S.-initiated trade dispute, many industries have been affected. China's retaliatory tariff on imported vehicles is also a threat to American auto industry. Tesla, the U.S. electric vehicle manufacturer, has taken the lead in raising prices in the Chinese market due to higher duties. Last month, Tesla decided to build a $2 billion factory in Shanghai. The largest U.S. automaker, General Motors, and German brand BMW expressed support for easing trade frictions. Since the supply chain has been affected, automakers have lowered their full-year profit forecasts. For more on the U.S.-China trade war and its impact on the car industry, we have in our Beijing studio Professor Liu Baocheng, Dean of the Center for International Business Ethics from the University of International Business and Economics. Welcome, sir. Welcome back. And also joining us, Mr. Gao Zhikai, who is a commentator for Current Affairs. Thank you, sir, for being with us. Meanwhile, we have in Washington, D.C., Mark Bush, professor from the School of Foreign Service at Georgetown University. Also joining us in Washington, Steve Puigt, managing partner at Wets Partners. It's good to see you once again, Mr. Puigt. I want to begin with you. Car industry, is it going to be the biggest victim of this U.S.-China trade war? Your assessment, very briefly.
Short answer is no. I think our agricultural sector is certainly going to take the hardest hit at this point because it will be much more long-lasting. I think the auto sector can recover once all of these negotiations and back and forth end a lot faster than ag.
All right. Professor Bush, what about your assessment? Obviously, for now, it is a place of crossfire.
The markets didn't seem terribly concerned about the first round of tariff escalation. The real question going forward is how do we see escalation go from here, and especially in light of China's threat to use non-tariffs, which in all honesty matter a lot more for the auto industry than the tariffs.
Professor Liu, this time China has already put out its list of the tariffs that is going to put on much further than it used to be. It's about $16 billion US. Almost 1/3 on this list are some kinds of vehicles, different kinds of vehicles, and different parts, engines of vehicles. Obviously, this is going to be the most hit area so far.
That's right. So right now, actually, I came from a number of dialogues from the United States for the last 2 weeks, and there has been quite a anxiety actually among all business circles, including the automakers, because they cannot just make a decision. They do not know how deep this war is going to be, and how the budget can be made, and how the market segments can be rearranged or restructured. So this is something very worrisome.
There's the thing. We've been talking about this trade war, but the effect of the trade war is only seen right now. If you think about if the trade war continues between China and the United States, a few months from now, that's when the time when people will really realize what does it all mean, these numbers. Mr. Gao.
Well, China does not want to have a trade war with the United States. This trade war was initiated by the United States and imposed on China, and China has no other option but to retaliate. For your question on the impact on the auto industry, definitely there will be major impact on the auto industry. The General Motors and Ford Motors, for example, their operations in mainland China are highly profitable, but most of these vehicles sold in China actually import engines or other major spare parts.
That's right.
So once you have tariffs imposed on the imports of these spare parts or the engines, definitely it will make their retail price in China much higher, and the General Motors cars and Ford Motor cars in China market will become less attractive.
So, Mr. Puigt, there seems to be no win-win game in a way for those car manufacturers, whether they are American, European, Japanese, or South Korean. I mean, in a way, they all have to use parts coming from different parts of the world, and some of them are actually coming from the United States. Therefore, the car prices retail likely to go up, and the consumers is likely to show their attitudes as a result of that. Mr. Puigt.
Well, I think you're absolutely right in that assumption. I think what we're seeing already in the U.S. is some indications that they're actually retroactively raising prices on some of the 2018 models, and I know I've been trying to find some information about pricing for 2019 models that are already in production as well. But I suspect that, again, the pricing will go up across the board, not only here in the U.S., but also throughout the world.
Yeah. Having said that, though, Professor Bush, I mean, car industry sounds like just one industry, but actually the car industry is having its reaches to different parts of the economy. You name it. That's why it is becoming such a pillar of many industries, many economies around the world. So, Professor Bush, from there, where are we going?
Well, you're absolutely right that the auto industry represents so much that we associate with mature manufacturing. It is one of those industries that stands out as an icon for precisely that reason. But the broader fabric here is U.S.-China trade relations, and this is somewhat of a distracting issue at the moment, these retaliatory tariffs with all the focus being on cars. We should be getting on to the business at hand, which is to improve relations and to deal with some of the themes that have been raised in the U.S. Section 301 case, and for that matter, China's litigation against Section 301 at the World Trade Organization. At some point, we have to negotiate this to make it all go away, and the sooner we get onto that, the better.
What is the point, do you think? When is the point, Professor Bush? May I invite your wisdom?
Well, we're going to have to wait a little bit until after the midterms, unless the Trump administration can offer some kind of win going into the midterms that looks like a concession. I'd like to see the focus shift more to the intellectual property and to investor rights. And the most concrete thing that we could be doing at the moment is revisiting the prospects for a U.S.-China bilateral investment treaty. So much of what is being asked for of China by the United States would be nicely dealt with in the context of a bilateral investment treaty.
Okay, thank you, sir. And Dr. Gao, you want to respond to our American colleague?
No, I think President Bush and his administration need to wake up to the hard lesson that trade war is not easy to win, and trade war is mutually destructive.
What if they don't wake up? What can you do?
Then the United States will be undermined by itself, mainly because it's not only losing its esteem in the world, people will give less and less respect to the United States, and the credibility of the United States will be eroded or destroyed, and then the United States economy will suffer because of the retaliation, not only just by China, but by India, by many European countries, by Japan, by South Korea, you name it.
But
trade war is not going to win.
Things are much more complicated than the United States versus the rest of the world. You see the negotiation going on between the United States and European countries, even though some of them are not necessarily successful. You also see Japan and the United States likely to go into further negotiation. We do not know the results of that. And you see attitudes coming from China and Russia, but a lot of things are very mixed picture. So Professor Liu, this is a time of confusion, but also a time of affirming our stance, which is what kind of world, what kind of trade internationally we want. Professor Liu, your thought about this confusion in a way, this specific state of time?
Well, people see that we are really seeing a sea wave of changes today because the isolation and retreat from the multilateral trading platform. But I do agree with you that the nature of trade disputes between United States versus EU or even versus Japan is very different to that really between the United States and China.
Yeah.
Because the it is not only a trade issue, it becomes a political issue, and it also becomes a
geopolitical issue. Yes,
geopolitical
indeed.
and also institutional.
But you know, since our focus is more about the auto industry, let's focus even more on some specific examples. We talk about the industry as a whole, but actually every example in the industry is important. Tesla, for example, its revenues in China doubled last year to more than $2 billion. This accounted for 20% of the company's total. Tesla CEO Elon Musk also visited Shanghai last month to open a $2 billion factory. Of course, he did it very low profile, given the political atmosphere in Washington and in the rest of the world's capitals. Therefore, Mr. Pruitt, the question is beyond even the trade war. What would this round of so-called trade war and even leading to geopolitics change mean for auto industry, for their future? Is there going to be a huge migration of automakers in different parts of the world? Is the structure of auto industry likely to be very different at the end of the day after this trade war? What about the employment opportunities? What about the pillar role it used to have in the economy? Will they still be the same? Mr. Pruitt?
Well, we've already seen several and heard several announcements from companies that have indicated they were going to build facilities abroad in China and elsewhere to manufacture their vehicles to get around this tariff fight. I would note, just in response to your previous question, that we're hearing at least some noise about some back-channel negotiations that are going on between the U.S. and the Chinese. And I think it's important to put that in context as we relate to the political situation here in America and the fact that we do have now in about 90 days our mid-term elections coming up. And that's going to put a lot of pressure on the Trump administration, quite frankly, to give on a number of issues as we move forward. Whether they do or not will, quite frankly, affect a number of congressional elections and will, I think, ultimately, long-term, have an impact on the way the U.S. then proceeds in these trade deals. So Congress has been flexing their muscles a little bit around some legislative initiatives that would, if not restrain, certainly restrict what the president can do on his own. And I think all of that is going to play very aggressively in the next 30 days as we see Congress come back from their summer recess.
Yeah, we are looking forward to that. What's going to happen, all the dramas then. Professor Liu, what about my question, though, that will the auto industry, as a result of this round of quote-unquote trade war, be different from what it used to be? Where it is located, the focus of this industry, and the potential of this industry?
I think there's going to be a fragmentation of the auto manufacturing industry, and
why would you say that?
That's because each of the big markets are really setting up great walls. So therefore, they have to put different operations within different walls. So that's very naturally. And also the driver for this fragmentation would be, number one, is really the buying power, the market size.
That's right.
And also the manufacturer cost, including materials and labor cost.
Professor Bush, what about your thoughts on the industry itself, its potential as a result of this?
I think two other factors are much more likely to shape the fragmentation of the U.S. auto industry. One will be the negotiations under NAFTA concerning rules of origin, and the other will be whether the United States signs a free trade deal with the European Union to match the free trade deal signed between Canada and the European Union. Those two factors will certainly lead a lot of U.S. auto vendors to entertain the prospect of moving to Canada, which is, in my view, a much greater issue at the moment than the tariffs that China has imposed in retaliation for the 301.
I see. Professor Bush, as someone who's been studying the industry, would you like to put a timeline about how much time do you think the auto industry would be calm and look around and try to figure out before they move to the next stage, which is to change the structure of the industry, as you mentioned earlier? Professor.
These investments are really lumpy, and I would imagine that until there's a better sense for clarity as to what's going to happen under NAFTA, whether the EU is going to negotiate with the U.S., or for that matter the UK with the U.S., and then the question being, how does the world look in terms of the availability of things such as subsidies? And in that regard, I'm very interested in the future of China 2025 as a potential draw for U.S. interest in producing, and for that matter, designing autos in the future.
I see. Dr. Gao, your thought about that?
Well, you talked about the impact on the automobile industry. I think if we remove all the other factors, including reducing tariffs to zero, then the U.S. auto industry is in no competitiveness compared with the German and the Japanese car industry. So the American industry in the automobile sector probably will be crushed if you take out all these other factors. However, I would say the automobile industry itself is under tremendous amount of change. The new types of vehicles,
yes.
the new energy vehicles, including electric cars and the hydrogen car, for example, are coming along. And therefore, if I advise President Donald Trump, he needs to wake up to this megatrend. He needs to really pool all the resources in the United States to capture the high ground in the new type of automobiles, rather than imposing tariffs and fighting a trade war on the traditional car industry.
As you may know, Dr. Gao, structural reform is very different and difficult for a politician than just putting on a tariffs on the goods coming from the other countries. That's just the easy cut over there. I'm sure you understand that perfectly well over the past few weeks. Mr. Pruitt, though, you know, there are Washington apparatus looking at innovation, looking at the industry's future, looking at geopolitically what is best for the United States with America first, fairly, some say. What do you say, how the policies is likely to influence eventually the growth of the auto industry in the U.S.?
Well, I would make 2 points. The first, that the automotive industry as a collective is very effective and is ramping up their lobbying and advocacy efforts across the board. And again, I think given the fact that we expect to see some shifts in the political balance here in America this fall, I think they're well positioned to impact that discussion. The second point, though, is I think given the nature of the automotive industry, I'm not one who suggests that they're going to wait for all these things to settle down. I think they're already sitting around tables, game playing some of these scenarios out to try and position themselves, because it takes a while to direct their resources where they want them to be.
I see. Thank you so much for the four of you for being with us. Steve Pruitt, Gao Zhikai, Liu Baocheng, last but not least, Mark Bush. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us, coming from your own perspectives. That is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine, or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From Tian Wei and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.